In this week's episode of Rufo and Lomez, we'll be talking about our origin story, where we came from, how we developed our politics, and where we hope the right goes in the future. We're not just going to be following the news, reacting to clips, and commenting like any other show out there. We're going to be taking our time at least once a week to do deep dives into the topics that matter, exploring things in depth, and making sure that you are equipped to navigate the difficult waters ahead. All that and more in this week's episode of Rufo and Lomez. So Lomez, this is a very exciting launch week for the show, and I thought we'd take the time to just slow down at the beginning, tell people who we are, tell people what we're trying to achieve with the podcast, and then give a sense of why we care about politics, care about the culture, and the experience that we've been through. And one of the interesting things, at least from my point of view, is that we had actually like a similar upbringing. You know, as we got to know each other over the last few years, there's so many moments where it's like, oh my God, we've kind of had like the same parallel tracks through life. And so why don't you start at the beginning? Tell me, like, where did you grow up? How did you get here from your humble origins, your bootstrap story from Northern California?
Oh man. Okay. Yeah, we'll get there. You know, we do have a similar background, and I think I just want to like actually even before getting there, because I'm trying to remember, when did our paths first cross? So like, let's work backwards a little bit, because we were going to start this podcast like a year ago. If you remember, we had a conversation.
That's right.
We had done a few like prototypes, not with the Blaze. You and I had just gotten on a call and we were just talking about whatever. I don't even remember what the impetus for that was, but maybe you do. And we had worked, so we did those and it was fun. We had a good time, but then life intervenes. You had another kid. We can get to that. I was busy doing stuff. So the plan was to restart this in the fall, and the Blaze was a willing partner. Thank you, Blaze. We're very excited to be here, excited to, you know, meet the Blaze audience and be a part of this awesome team. So that's all great. And we had done some stuff previous to that. You were making videos, and I think you were just kind of experimenting with all sorts of stuff, the million things you do. And I had helped you sort of write some scripts for one of these videos. But do you actually remember like a specific moment where our paths crossed? I had been aware of you. You were like this big, Republican right-wing activist. But where did our paths first cross? I actually don't remember.
Yeah, I think it was like our paths first crossed digitally. And so I saw some tweets from you, and I'm always interested in like figuring out, hey, what's new, what's creative. And I sensed with the content that you were writing at that time pseudonymously, that you had something different to offer, and that you were keyed into the culture in a way that was totally distinct from the kind of mainstream establishment conservative opinion. And so that to me was like very interesting. And so we kind of struck up a friendship. We talked a little bit, and then you came out, I think it was post-docs or pre-docs. I can't remember. For a visit. We worked on some projects together.
Because
was it pre-docs?
So, yeah. So, okay. For those of you who don't know, I'm certain I'm new to some of the audience here. I was an anonymous figure online. I was not like a political activist or a political commentator. I was just like a guy who posted online. At the time when I first started doing this, I was an academic. So I was teaching at UC Irvine in the English department there. I was in the English department there for over a decade. And I had become increasingly disillusioned, let's say, by academia. We can get into some of that maybe this episode, maybe later episodes. It's going to be a recurring theme. But I started posting online. It was like this refuge where I could just express my contempt for the left. Okay, the left was like ruining my
like driving
my
life.
Okay, I was going crazy. I was living in California. I had actually a great job. I really enjoyed teaching at UCI, but it was like they had a death wish. I just saw like this insane ideology slowly, and not even slowly, but taking over the left and ruining, just absolutely obliterating and turning to ash everything it touched, including my job, including my livelihood, including my sort of like other cultural hobbies. You know, I love literature, the publishing industry, which is where I eventually landed. I also have a publishing company, as you know. And so I started, you know, going online to express this stuff. I guess it was probably somewhere in that, you know, era, maybe around the first Trump president, or maybe later. I don't know. But so we came into contact online. I'm an online creature. I was an online native. But you, I mean, had you been like online for a while before you became this like prominent activist, or was coming online just like a part of, you know, building your profile for stuff you were already doing?
Yeah, yeah, it was the online came second for me. And so I started doing yeah, I was a documentary filmmaker for the first like 10 plus years of my career. And the documentary filmmaker is like documentary film industry is no better than a college English department in the UC system. And I saw the same trends that you identified and felt in the English department in the documentary world. And I saw it like early on, talking about like the kind of mid-Obama term. You know, the first term of Obama, accelerating the second term of Obama. All of the arguments that you would hear then, you know, in 2020, I'd heard by like 2012, which is, you know, simultaneously race is a social construct, but you know, race is the central prism through which we should think about everything, and race should determine your position in the hierarchy. I remember at one point, like the identity stuff had gotten so pervasive. And it was just very clear, like, all right, you're applying for grants or whatever. I had a colleague, a producer, he's like, you know, I think I'm just going to bite the bullet on my new film. I'm going to just identify as bisexual for the purposes of like qualifying, because I'm a white guy. What else am I supposed to do? And, you know, that was kind of a big laugh at the time, but it was just indicative of the broader kind of ideological capture. And so I think those of us who are in the culture industries saw what was kind of proto-woke very early. And we also saw it from the inside, right? If you were an intern at the Heritage Foundation and then you worked in a Republican congressional office, you know, you understood woke by 2020 as a purely political problem from the outside.
Right.
And where I think we were able to connect on is like, no. We saw it first from the inside and then had to do kind of like a late pivot, right? A kind of career change. And so I got online after I started doing some reporting and writing and my first like think tank work in Seattle. And it was like starting with, you know, with like 100 Twitter followers, you know, like a Facebook page, and then just watching this thing kind of collect energy, and then and really be like an amazing, you know, I think we denigrate online culture, online politics, online platform as a kind of meta phenomenon, but actually like online is amazing, and there are gripes and problems and issues and challenges, but you know, I met so many interesting people, you know, just through engaging online. I learned a ton from other people. I watched other people, and I think that our friendship, which first emerged online and then offline, was quite interesting. And I'm wondering if you can tell the story. You were like this anonymous poster, you know, for a number of years. You had this job. It was precarious. You know, if they had discovered your postings, you would be in a lot of trouble. Tell us the story about how you moved from pseudonymous to then public, how it intersected with your academic career. Give us like the origin story of Lomez.
I'll give you the potted history. Okay. It's like varied and complicated. All right. And, there are, you know, anytime you're telling your own story, there's going to be some amount of, mythologizing of your own narrative. Okay. So I'm well aware of how this goes for myself. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm a California kid. I grew up in California. This is important, by the way, and we should talk about why that's important. But if you grow up in California, you see things happen earlier than elsewhere. There's like an old saw about California being 10 years ahead of the rest of the country. I think that's like more or less true. But importantly, we're also both millennials, like elder millennials. And so the California I grew up in like the 90s, was kind of perfect. This was in some sense like
no, it really was.
High watermark of Western civilization. Like it really was about as good as it gets. And, you know, I like look back, I grew up in this small town, small suburb of San Francisco, about 30 miles outside of San Francisco. It was kind of perfect. And not only was it perfect, I kind of like we knew growing up that this was like perfect. And what happens is you see this thing start to deteriorate over time. And that deterioration is a consequence of all sorts of things, a kind of general entropy, but also there are very specific political things that are happening that create this kind of deterioration. Okay, so I go to school, I get a job in tech. I worked for Google for a few years at an undergrad on the like search engine in the early 2000s. Things were very good.
In Seattle, right? The Fremont office in Seattle.
That's right. Exactly.
My old neighborhood.
I lived in Seattle. It was beautiful near Gasworks Park. Loved it. And left to go back to grad school. In hindsight, maybe not the best decision. Might have just stayed in tech. I'd be fine now. I could just do whatever I want. However, I did go back to grad school. I had this kind of romantic notion about, you know, being an English professor, maybe writing novels. I always loved reading books. I loved literature. So I'd go back to school, get my finish grad school, get a job in the English department at UCI, as I said, and start teaching there over time. I've always been on the right. I've always been a kind of on the, I don't know, outside edge of the mainstream right. I was maybe a paleocon is the right word at the time. I really liked Pat Buchanan. He was kind of my North Star through the Bush years. And I also became sort of enamored with the anti-immigration right, the immigration restrictionist right, people like Steve Saylor, people like Larry Oster. These people were saying things that you couldn't hear elsewhere on the right, but made a lot of sense to me. And again, in California, maybe more so than anywhere else in the country, at least at the time, maybe with the exception of Texas, immigration like is the issue that you're paying attention to because it changed so much of what California was from the time I grew up there in the 90s to what it became throughout the late 2000s and into the 2010s. Okay, so I'm posting online. I'm a big Trump supporter, but I'm in academia. I'm kind of locked in this strange situation of having like two different personalities. People have joked it was like it like must be like what it was to be like gay in the 80s or something. Like you're like not allowed to talk about it. There's like closeted Trump supporters. So I'm a Trump supporter. Publishing industry is going down the tubes. It's getting infected by woke. I decide I'm going to start a publishing company. This was a crazy idea. But
terrible idea. Yeah, like
terrible
everyone was
idea.
like, "Don't do it. Do not do this." Yeah,
don't do this.
Just stick it out. Yeah,
yeah, whatever.
Were you getting advice to that effect? Like people like,
yeah,
hey,
more or less.
just,
oh no, everybody's saying, "Don't do this. It's a terrible idea. You have a good thing. Just keep your head down and go." But a few things happened. Like I always wanted to do something more. I was feeling a little bit agitated anyway, and I knew there was something more ambitious that I wanted to pursue. You know, you reach a certain age and you're like, all right, if I'm going to do it, I got to do it now. My father passed away. And so I'm like, all right, that like created this juncture point. So I just went all in, took a leap of faith, started this new job. I had 3 kids at the time, struggling to pay the mortgage, and slowly built this publishing company. And as it got bigger and started to get more prominence, of course, you start getting attention from journalists and the left, et cetera. This Guardian journalist who I know have had a lot of interaction with, this guy, Jason Wilson, Jason's a Antifa activist, essentially, who writes these hit pieces on like right wingers for The Guardian that amount to like breaking news, like the right wing exists in America, and here are these people who are like right wingers. So I'm the subject of one of these docs pieces. I start getting all sorts of attention, and and I'm like, all right, well, I might as well just lean into it. I lean into it. Part of leaning into it means making these podcast appearances. I start going on Charlie Kirk's show and Bannon's show, and here I am a couple years later, and I guess that's kind of the way it's gone for me.
Lomez, you have to tell me, what is your preferred method for pouring a glass of whiskey?
Chris, I like 1 cube of ice in my whiskey. That's how I like it. I went away from drinking bourbon for many years because I found that like whiskey, like so many of these like indulgences become very performative. Like whiskey glasses, have like these whiskey bottles with like leather wrappings and these, interesting shaped bottles and such. It was all a little bit too much for me, but now I drink Flying Ace bourbon. And I actually like it quite a lot. It's very simple. The taste is great, so you don't lose any of that great flavor. But it's just like simple bourbon drinking. My wife also likes it. So this is my new bourbon of choice, Flying Ace. And I know you enjoy a little bit of Flying Ace yourself.
Yeah, I am not a drinker. I gave up the habit many years ago now, but it's something that I have on the shelf. And when people come over, I pour them a glass. And really, without exception, people have said, hey, this is great. I haven't heard of this. I like it. It's simple. It goes back to the basics. It's all American. And then I tell them that it's also made by people who love this country, which again, in corporate life today is not a guarantee. And so I would recommend for everybody, if you're looking for a new bottle, you want to get back to the fundamentals, you want an all-American whiskey with all-American patriots at the helm, pick up a bottle of Flying Ace. You can visit their website at flyingacespirits.com. And if you enter the promo code BLAZE, they'll give you free shipping. Something that you should do. Again, that's flyingacespirits.com. Promo code BLAZE for free shipping. You could do it with ice, without ice. You could do it with Coke. You could do it with nothing else. In any case, Flying Ace is the one. Yeah, I remember that, and I remember kind of talking you through it. I've helped a number of people through various like doxing episodes, and I have just like a soft spot for people who are being, mistreated in this way by the institutional left. I think it's such a dirty, underhanded tactic. I think there's a lot more at play there. I think, someone like Jason Wilson at The Guardian and himself is like nothing. But there's a broader apparatus kind of behind the scenes that pushes a lot of this kind of doxing, intimidation, harassment. I went through it like many years ago now when I first got involved in Seattle politics.
Wait, real quick, let me just pause for a second because I want to ask this. Like, you weren't political, right? You weren't like a political activist when you first got started, but because for me, I was sort of forced into this. I might have done it anyway, but my ships were burned. I had no choice but to just push forward. So like, you were also kind of on the outside of politics, right? And were you sort of forced into it in a similar way?
Yeah. So in a similar way, I always like loved politics. As a young person, I had very left-wing politics through high school, through the first part of college. In college, I became, disillusioned with left-wing politics as I traveled around the world, like realizing that these ideas, like when they hit contact with reality anywhere in the world, are a complete disaster. And so like I went from like, Zoran Mamdani politics to just like kind of exiting through disillusionment because I had seen so much. I've seen enough. I've watched it. I've studied it. I've experienced it, and also got a taste for the actual kind of culture of left-wing politics, which is just an ugly, degrading, drab, and dismal culture. And so I just was like, as a young guy graduating college, I want to see the world. Whatever I can do to get out into the furthest reaches of planet Earth, that's what I want to do. My ticket to do that was this documentary filmmaking gig. And then, I had opportunities. I worked on some films. I directed some films. I was making enough money where I could support myself, where I was, doing fairly well, and could travel internationally, could travel domestically, see, some incredible things, incredible experiences, like have this like adventure, right? The 20s are a big adventure.
Yep. Yeah.
And then my politics shifted over this decade, shifted right. Read a lot of conservative literature, conservative philosophy, conservative social science in particular that was really persuasive to me.
Was there a specific like person or like piece of writing that like unlocked something for you?
Yeah, I think, when I was directing a film about American poverty in like these 3 lost American cities, and the writings of Charles Murray were very influential.
Interesting.
Not the bell curve, which is like
Coming
the
apart?
one that like coming apart,
Yeah.
what it means to be a libertarian, losing ground.
Yeah.
Then you go back to like Nisbet, you go back to all of the like kind of Ivy League conservative social scientists that were doing great work at that time, in the past. Yeah, Moynihan. Oh, well, I have like mixed feeling, love-hate with Moynihan, but that kind of tradition, right, where it was like essentially the conservative critique of the Great Society, and it was like, oh wow, this actually completely explains what I'm observing on the ground in this like multi-year documentary shoot in these kind of dismal and forgotten places.
Yep.
And so it's like, oh, cool, I'm making this film, and now like I'm a conservative. And so navigating this film through the documentary world was such a challenge. It was just an awful experience. And then like word got out, like Rufo's some kind of conservative or right winger. And all of my opportunities then just like disappeared overnight. So already the industry was going like, oh, kind of white guy. This is like a little bit more difficult, but like fine, whatever, you make it work. But then it was like, oh no, right winger, like boom. I had like grant makers who were basically like, oh, you're on the blacklist.
Yep.
I had contractors, guys that I'd worked with over the years and hired to do, production or editorial for me. Send me messages. Hey, I heard you're like a conservative now. Like I can never work with you again. You're just like a terrible person. Like have some heckin' decency,
Yeah, but like a lot of, so I know people who were in a maybe similar position at that time. Maybe they were always on the right. Maybe they transitioned into the right, somewhat similar trajectory. But if they were like filmmakers or musicians or like novelists, and I know these people personally, they just decided, I'm just going to hide my politics. I'm just not going to talk about it. I will embed this kind of messaging and these themes within my work, but I understand like being explicit about it is going to, first of all, jeopardize all these opportunities I might have for the reasons you just stated, but also like could potentially turn off audiences. Like audiences are so allergic to taking on any kind of conservative message unless they're already conservative audiences. There's this asymmetry where conservatives will consume left-wing media, knowing it's left-wing media and left-wing art, but it doesn't go the other way. So my question here is like, why not just say nothing? Like, why did you feel compelled to say anything?
I just like temperamentally, you can't live that way, right?
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, I
you
have
can.
to like hide all of my.
Do.
I did it for a while. And then it just became untenable, and it just was like I could feel it limiting my life experience, limiting my intellectual curiosity. It was just like wearing, a huge, like carrying around a huge weight at all times, and it's like this is not good. I'm not actually saying what I believe. I'm not actually representing my opinion, and it was kind of an amazing transition. Whereas I became more outspoken, never like polemical at first, but just kind of gently in the most like New York Times conservative columnist kind of manner, like introducing these ideas into my kind of professional circles. And it was like, no matter how gently you approach it, it's like met with extreme hostility. And so it was like, all right, well, if this is how it's going to go, let's just do it. And so I decided, again, like similar to you, already had kids, already had, kind of a life, already had a career. Just said, all right, let's just like burn the boats and let's do this and let's do the politics. And for me, it wasn't like start a publishing house. For me, it was get involved in political life, get involved in kind of political intellectual work. And my experience was like, all right, it was in retrospect great. You make the plunge. It's very hard. You get beat up. You get put through the ringer. You run through the gauntlet, whatever metaphor you want to use. And then you kind of emerge on the other side. And for me, it was more activism. For you, it was like more literary publishing. But you realize like how kind of phony and artificial your former world was. It's like a world of managed opinion.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of, unspoken web of opinions that are acceptable, and they move a little bit this way, they scurry a little bit that way. And you live in this carefully managed world that on the surface is creative, right? It's filmmaking, it's English department, it's literature. But like, it's actually the least creative and most conventionally bound world. And then you feel like so grateful. You're like, I'm out of it. I don't have to like pretend. I don't have to suck up to these people. I remember like, you're like, oh, I'm sucking up to like the admissions guy at like the Toronto Film Festival. Who cares?
Right.
This guy's a loser. I can't believe I sucked up to that guy.
Well, that's the thing. It's like so hollow, and there's nothing. There's no life in it. It is, as you say, like this kind of managerial sort of space. It is overmanaged. It's incurious, etc. But, and this is like the thing that is worth like being introspective about and interrogating is. It still does, I think, have this kind of incentive architecture that keeps you in place. So it's the money. There's a certain kind of status laundering and sort of economy of prestige that these places can give you, and a certain amount of stability and comfort. And so it is easy to tell yourself a story like, I'm just going to go along to get along. I'm going to keep my opinions to myself, or only express them in this very mild way. Yeah, esoterically. Because what I want is just like a decent life, man. I just want to get along. I want to be able to pay my mortgage. I want my kids to have like a social life where when I show up at like the party, people aren't like looking at you weird, like you have a third, like three heads or something, which, and so my question is like, yes, there's something incredibly liberating, and has been for me too, when you just take the plunge and you just go. It's this leap of faith that I'm glad I've taken. But I think it's a mistake to also say that there aren't like social costs, and this thing doesn't have social costs. And so I'm curious, in your experience, as much as you want to talk about it, like, did you experience those social costs, and how do you like sort of balance the ledger between what you're able to do now versus those costs that you have to incur just by sort of being out there and saying the things you want to say? Or does that even cross your mind?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it crosses your mind because it's like punching you right in the face, and you just like you have to react to it. It is the reality that you live in, and then you have to figure out what to do about it. I just think like ultimately, if you want to be a normie, you want to have a job and a kind of steady life. You don't want to rock the boat. You want to keep your opinions mostly to yourself and show up at the baseball game, kind of without a second thought from anybody. Like, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But you should just like start a business or sell insurance or, become a product manager at Google or do whatever. I think that if you have committed to a life in the arts, a life of the mind, a life of intellectual or political work, like that actually demands something different. And it demands a kind of conviction that the other professions do not necessarily demand. And so it's like, yeah, if you're like, oh, I don't want to do this, I'm just going to get a job in corporate. I actually respect that. I think that's quite noble. It's quite sensible. But if it's like, hey, I'm in the documentary world or now I'm in the political world, like you have to actually say what you think. You have to be willing to pay the price. And the social costs for me were like enormous. Like you actually sacrifice an entire life. My social life, my family life, my like geographical life is totally different. It went through a complete transformation. Um, and at the beginning, it was very hard. I felt resentful. I felt, frightened at times. You're getting like this full onslaught of intimidation that literally shows up at your doorstep. When I was living in Seattle. And then you just have to decide, am I just going to shut up and go back to the defensive crouch and hope that, nobody bothers me? Or am I going to do what needs to be done? And for me, that was committing, saying, hey, no going back, building a professional career that was in politics, that was somewhat robust or even anti-fragile to the various attempts to kind of undercut you. And then it was like moving. We moved to this like amazing small town. We now live on like a old farm property. We have new friends, new commitments, new kind of educational approach with our kids, new city. And in one sense, it's a lot, right? It's a huge change.
Yeah.
It's a huge sacrifice, but then you get through it and you're like, that wasn't a sacrifice at all. And actually what I sacrificed was so trivial. I can't believe I was even scared of losing it at one time, because what I have on the other side is so much better. New friends, new opportunities, new business, new community. It's like, wow, thank God I went through all of that and arrived at this new place.
Yeah, I
new
think
podcast, right? New podcast.
Yeah. Well, I think this is like an
pinnacle.
Important message. Yeah. I like want to encourage people as much as possible to take that leap. Just do it. Like have the courage of your convictions to go do it. And if you have, these creative ambitions, if you feel like there's something more that you want to do than the 9-to-5 office job, just go for it. It doesn't have to be sort of politically oriented, by the way. That's like a secondary or even like tertiary concern. You should just go do it. But I also, and I think like maybe part of what we're trying to do here is like sort of provide the sort of template for that. But the other thing too is I do want the culture to exist such that, you can just survive in these normie spaces as just a conservative by default. Okay. And of course there are some places where you can do that. But if you look at the charts where they show, the political breakdown of these different professions and who they give money to, and it's like 99.9% of academia, and tech is this way, and it across the board, these like white collar professions in particular are just dominated by a kind of default liberalism. And I think, we're talking about like, okay, what is this podcast? What are we trying to do here? What is the larger term goal? There's the strict sort of explicit political goal. You want certain policies enacted, but there's also this meta-political goal. There's the sort of social architecture that you're trying to manipulate in these small ways, how people, their sort of attitudes and beliefs, and how can we like change that subtly so that you can just be an academic who's a conservative and not just like a milquetoast, token conservative. The bow tie guy, the sort of, every econ department has like the token libertarian guy. I don't even know if that counts as conservative, but he's sort of conservative coded. But you can you can be like opposed to, mass immigration, and you can have like actual, right-wing views, and you can just state those views plainly. I mean, I wouldn't say it's radicalizing because I was already sort of pretty far down the road. But when I was at a faculty party and Scalia had just died, and all these like the faculty was like celebrating this. I was like, it was in this conversation where they were like celebrating that Scalia had just passed away. This, to them, he's like this horrible, villainous creature. And I'm just sitting there going like, what kind of assumptions do you have to be making subconsciously about everyone else around you, that at a party where there's just like dozens of people and like families, that you could just be celebrating a guy's death like this? That's crazy. And it's indicative of this default sort of leftist set of assumptions that people are making in these spaces. And I just think we need to like get to a place where that's no longer the case, where you can just be a right winger. You can express these right wing views. It doesn't jeopardize your opportunity to get gigs and have a job and et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, that's part of this like larger project. And I think something that both of us have gone through and has sort of colored the way that we think about politics.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's certainly something I've been working on in the field of higher education, working with various like reform efforts, working with, governors, working with Department of Education now at the federal level, to try to broaden or essentially increase the dimensionality of academic institutions so that it's not just this flat, narrow, monoculture, kind of censorious culture, but to open it up and to bring in new people with new ideas beyond just, hey, we'll give you like one guy in the kind of social and political thought department that is like a bow tie conservative, and then one libertarian in the economics department.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of hates him, but we keep him around as like a token or a mascot of something, so we can say that there's more than one opinion. When in fact those kind of approaches, right? These archetypes are not a threat to the system at all. They're kind of symbiotic. They're like kind of a prey animal within the larger hierarchy of these institutions. They're a kind of a defense mechanism, and I think that is like so impoverishing. And so I'd like to change that. And I think a lot of it is really just changing elite culture as a whole. And one of my personal projects, and something I hammer on over and over and over, and I think we're both trying to do this in our own ways, is conservatives who aspire to be a counter elite, or who aspire to lead in arts and culture or politics, have to get over this awful habit that has been a habit for a very long time of seeking the approval of the left.
Yes.
To say, oh, the left controls prestige, the left controls style, the left controls aesthetic good, the left controls like how I should, think about things in polite society or whatever. And therefore, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the kind of head pat, from the left, or the head pat from those institutions. And I think that's like something that we should change. It's something that we will change, which is to say, I don't like delegate my self-perception to my opponents.
Right.
Right. No, we don't do that anymore. Actually, we assert our own self-conception in the world, and we succeed to the extent that our opponents bend to it.
Yeah.
I've seen that even in my own ideas, right? Like on critical race theory, on transgenderism in institutions, on DEI, on higher education. Like I haven't moved an inch since 2020. If anything, I've moved further right. I've taken a tougher tack. But I've seen my former opponents year after year after year come in my direction, right? The New York Times kind of median opinion is now much closer to me than it was in 2021, when it was like just smear piece after smear piece. And so I think like that's the model that I want to create in the podcast. And I want our listeners to be that kind of person with that kind of ambition, that kind of desire, but maybe not at the beginning, that kind of tactical knowledge or that kind of confidence. We should give you the knowledge, give you the tactics, give you the confidence to do that wherever you may be.
Yeah, let me like ask you this question. This is something I have struggled with a little bit, and I go back and forth all the time, but I think it's a kind of central question for these sort of meta-political issues we're discussing here, which is whether or not we like the idea of forfeiting our judgments of aesthetics and our sort of like moral judgments, importantly, to the left and the institutions of the left. It just is the case that they hold a tremendous amount of power. And there are kind of two paths here that we can take to assert our own sort of moral and aesthetic judgments for ourselves. One path is we try to take back these institutions. We try to infiltrate them somehow, or bring them to us, or become them. We take them over. We sort of change the personnel around. We change the tone of these places and how they operate so that they more align with our own interests. Or path two is you go and create a kind of parallel set of institutions. Maybe these things aren't mutually exclusive. I don't know. One thing, I'm trying to do is create a kind of parallel institution. We have a publishing company that in many ways emulates, Big Five publishing. And it's starting to grow, and it's starting to grow more so than I honestly ever could have imagined when I started it. And we have all these different imprints, and we're publishing different kinds of work. It's not just political. We're doing fiction and, sci-fi and genre stuff. But it's operating kind of on its own track, like with like our own warehouse. Now we're using these big retailers. We're going to be selling books on Target.com and BarnesandNoble.com. So we're kind of using these maybe neutral institutions, but it is a separate and sort of parallel thing. Okay, this is all just to ask the question: what is the right tact here? I think it's a huge mistake, for example, for us to just give up on the idea of like higher ed. We need highly educated people. Maybe not everybody needs to go to college. I think like the model for college is completely broken, and we want to do something about that. But like we need a place where we can take our, capable, talented, motivated students and equip them with more sort of sophisticated ideas and turn them into, powerful, competent lawyers and technicians, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we do this? Like, is it parallel? Is it we capture the institution, some combination? What's the strategy here?
Yeah, I mean, look, the advantage that we have stems from our disadvantage. Our disadvantage is that we have such a poor position within all of these institutions, and therefore our advantage is that anything that we do is a worthwhile attempt. And so I think we're still in the phase where you have to do all of it simultaneously. You have to experiment with the various approaches and see what creates progress. But on higher education or media, for example, two very important sectors or categories, you need to do both. So like in media, you need to have new publications, right? New publications, new ideas, capturing a new part of the market, serving kind of new generational cohort. You have to have that, but you also have to have something like Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And then in the last year, as the general culture has shifted, especially after Trump won his reelection bid, if you're watching, what Bezos did was start firing all of the wokes, start firing all of the worst, like left-wing, activists on the staff, and then issuing a memo. Hey, we need to hire more, free marketeers. We need to have a pro-capitalism, pro-business line in our editorial page, and we need to have, basically everybody adapting to this new culture. Right? The Washington Post was, in the last 5 years, the worst publication, the most left-wing, the most dishonest, the most kind of smear-driven, and it had the craziest and most deranged and hysterical internal culture.
Yeah.
And so is the Washington Post like a beacon of, freedom and America and a bastion of like Trump-conquered territory? No. But has it moved significantly in the right direction, and does that yield some sort of benefit in the larger culture? Absolutely, yes. And so
all right,
you need to have both, because the goal is not just to have, Black Rifle coffee. The goal is to have Black Rifle coffee as like a hedge against, Starbucks or whatever, so that Starbucks changes, everything else changes, the market as a whole, the boundaries of that market shift in the direction that we want it to shift.
All right, I'm going to push back a little bit here because, okay, so I know what you mean about like the Washington Post going from like far left, okay, to now it's like sort of back towards the center, but it's certainly not on the right. And I wouldn't count Jeff Bezos as like an ideological ally. I think at best he's kind of a, neutral playing field who I think maybe he has ideas about editorial neutrality, and he's going to have like the conservative voice and the liberal voice, and they're going to have this debate. But isn't that just like where we came from? And if that is the thing that emerges out of this period of unwinding the excesses of the last 10 years, which is these institutions just go back to being kind of default liberal rather than like insane progressive left, like basically communist, like veiled communist organizations. Like we actually haven't won anything. We went 10 steps back. Now we've come maybe 3 steps forward, but in the grand scheme of things, we're still 7 steps behind. So I don't know. I mean, am I overstating that this is maybe being a little bit too optimistic about what we can do with these institutions if we're relying on Jeff Bezos? Like, isn't there something maybe a little bit more aggressive, like with a little bit more meat on the bone that might actually, create some lasting, significant change that can move the needle beyond just this slow and steady decade by decade march toward a sort of like default progressivism? Is there something more than that?
Yeah, there should be, but you also have to be realistic about who can deliver what. And so Jeff Bezos is not, one of us. He's not a partisan on our behalf. He's not going to turn, the Washington Post into a kind of right-wing alternative to the New York Times. And so, but I think what's important in this example is that, let's say he represents like the modal opinion or the median opinion or the kind of the opinion that just kind of bounces with whatever is the conventional wisdom. I think it's important, because a center left paper is better than a far left paper. It just shifts everything a bit in our direction. But B, because it's an indicator of the cultural fights that we've actually made progress on, the cultural fights that we've tentatively won. And so to me, it's like a lagging indicator of where the culture has moved. And look, yes, should it move, 10 steps to the right? Absolutely. Should we have more ambitious plans to take over publications, to take over institutions, to build out, better alternatives? 100%. But I think you also have to kind of calmly and coolly say, okay, let's just take stock where we were in 2020 and where we are in 2025. Even that shift at one time felt almost unimaginable, right? And so like notch the progress, cement that as the new status quo, and then figure out, okay, now what is the 10 steps forward plan? And so I don't think that they're kind of irreconcilable. I actually think that it's just kind of, okay, measuring things over time. Is it going in the right direction?
Yeah.
Consolidate the win. It's like, okay, crazy, like Karen Attiah, the like kind of psycho racialist, Washington Post star. Is she like unhireable now in prestige media? I think yes. That's a good thing. Take the win and then try to say, okay, well, can we get someone that is even better now, suddenly hireable or desirable even at those same publications? That's like the next step. But we shouldn't discount progress, because the one thing I've learned is that incremental success yields the possibility of new success. Yeah. And so if you're not acknowledging that and you're constantly saying, oh, I'm measuring it against some high ideal, you're not building the energy and motivation that you need to make, the next step.
Okay, I think I agree mostly, but this might be a point of sort of like ongoing sort of tension or disagreement here, because I do think there's like a legitimate counter argument, which is once you narrow the scope of what victory looks like, which is like getting Karen Attiah fired and maybe making her unhireable, rather than expanding the horizon of what's possible, what it does is actually shrinks your ambition sort of permanently. And then you get stuck just with taking this one win, there's a kind of complacency that sets in, or that becomes the sort of target, and you lose sight of the fact that there is a much bigger project underway. I mean, I guess this just is like a empirical question. What works? Like what gets us to the destination we're trying to get to? And maybe we have, I don't know that we have a disagreement about what that destination is, but maybe we do, like I don't want just a kind of gradual rewind of the last 10 years that gets us back to, some period maybe, or like even back to like the late 90s and, pre 9/11, and we can just like go from there. I think the trajectory we were on then was more or less going to lead here. I sort of believe in path dependence of that kind. I don't believe in going backwards. I'm definitely on the right, but I'm not a reactionary in the sense that like, the past is over. There is no going back. There's only the future, and we need to imagine what that future looks like. And I don't want a future that just rewinds a kind of neoliberal project where conservative liberalism is in a kind of loggerheads with a much more aggressive and dominant liberalism. And I think we could, potentially get stuck in a situation like that if we're not sort of more creative and more radical about how we think victory of like what victory conditions look like. And so, you said like, Jeff Bezos isn't going to sort of create a right-wing New York Times. And my question would just be, well, then who is? Like, maybe that is the thing we just focus on. Like we need to marshal the resources and the energy and the will to do something of that magnitude. And, what that looks like, how that looks, I don't know, but I'll just say there is a danger that satisfying ourselves with incremental measures in the meantime, or as a substitute to those larger goals, are a potential trap. And I know you're not saying it's a substitute. I hear you. I hear you saying like we do need to pursue both of these things in tandem. But the incremental path is easier. It's more straightforward. It's a clearer picture. And I think if we're not really aggressively pursuing the bigger thing, we do sort of hurt ourselves potentially into the cul-de-sac where the incremental version becomes all there is. Okay, so I'll just say that as a sort of mild pushback.
Yeah, no. I mean, point taken, and I don't think that these things are really in total dispute. I think they're complementary, and look at it like diversification, right, of your portfolio or whatever. You have your blue chip stocks, you have your safer bets, incremental growth, 5% compounding, whatever. And then you have your like venture capital investments, things that 90% of them fail, but the 10% that succeed are like paradigm shifting. I think that's still good. I think that's still the way to do it. I guess my pushback on your idea of, well, maybe we need to create kind of the right-wing New York Times or have bigger ambitions or create these counter institutions at that high level. I mean, the right has done that, right? Like we're not the first ones to consider that, and the track record of those bets has been not great.
True.
And we don't want to badmouth our friends and colleagues in various parts of the
we should do that.
economy.
We should do that. Go ahead.
We should, yeah. But
let it rip.
But look,
man.
I mean, I'll take the example in filmmaking, right? That was my former domain. There was like the big right wing dream of, we're going to have right wing movie studios, we're going to have right wing content, we're going to and it's like. And the big idea was like pouring, I don't know, $50 million into a film version of an Ayn Rand novel, which was an absolute like aesthetic disaster, and then was also just like a complete write-off for the investors. And you see this like periodically in Hollywood, right? The kind of right-wing attempt to create movies. We need to have politics is downstream from culture. We need to invest big, $100 million in movie making. And it just like doesn't work. It's never worked. It's always guys that come in with a big dream, a great sales pitch. They burn $100 million, and it's like a total kind of aesthetic, cultural, and financial loss.
True.
And so, I'm not opposed to it, but I think that we've actually got to ask better questions. Well, why can't we do it? Why can't we have the money? There's money sloshing around on the right. You have right-wing billionaires, you have right-wing, investors, you have, plenty of cash. You have, you had zero interest rates for like 15 years. So the question is actually not, are we not trying hard enough? The question is, why are those moonshot efforts or highly ambitious efforts, why have they not succeeded?
The obvious
that to
answer,
me is a
Chris,
more
is
interesting question.
They haven't given it to us yet. Okay. So
that's true.
We can just start by, redoing this experiment with
sponsoring
the right
this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That is really,
let us off the leash. Let us do our thing. Okay. But there's this other problem, which is these efforts you're talking about. The moment you begin with the premise that you are doing the right-wing version of the ex-liberal thing, you've already lost, okay?
You've already
lost.
Lost.
Completely backwards. And it's the inverse of what the left has been doing over the last few years. We need our own liberal version of Joe Rogan. Okay, no, you've already lost. There's no such thing as that. Yeah. You can't just reproduce the model of what has worked in this kind of neutral space. It's sort of like nominally not liberal. It's just Hollywood. Okay. We all know Hollywood is implicitly liberal, but it doesn't, and this is important. Conservatives need to realize this. Liberals don't think of it in that way. They don't conceive of their own projects as being firstly political. They end up being political, and they're sort of like infected by this kind of ideological rot, which has become kind of rotted out. I mean, it's very transparent and bad. But when they go to make these things, they are just making art. They are just telling stories that they think are sort of compelling and urgent and et cetera, et cetera. That's not to say that there aren't explicit, like, sort of political actors working in those spaces. There are, of course there are. But the artists themselves don't conceive of it in that way. And when they're given a budget to go make, whatever, the new Snow White, it's not like, go turn Snow White into this sort of like libtarded fantasy. That's not what they tell the director. And so like we need to...
But I would disagree on this though, because the people in the boardrooms at the big companies like Disney, for example, where I've done a lot of reporting, and certainly the big grant makers in the visual arts, the documentary arts, and other art forms, kind of writing, the big grant makers are explicitly political, and they think of it in hyper political terms, and they're essentially like duping the creative class by saying, "Hey, go make your art with the expectations delivered almost like through osmosis, that they'll produce left-wing art because that's the water around them, that's the culture that they're growing up in, even if they don't realize what they're doing." So I think that it's not just it's not political by accident. It's very deliberately political.
But
and
that's
even
where
like
it's
the
gone
Disney
wrong. Okay, that's why liberals have lost their foothold on the culture broadly, and why the culture's become so bad is because they are becoming too explicit. It's becoming like too transparent, and it would be a complete mistake for the right to just reinvent all the same problems that liberal culture is currently facing. Like, when it works, it's because there's a certain sort of like confidence that like liberal creatives and creative industries had, at least at one point. They wouldn't have to say the thing. They wouldn't have to impose the thing on the creatives. It would just kind of happen as a matter of sort of inertia. It like you said, it was just like the water they were swimming in. But now they have to, once you have to impose it, it ruins the thing. it somehow like disenchants the thing you're trying to make. And so I guess like we're in agreement here, which is like the right can't make that same mistake of imposing its political priors on the process. You have to find people who kind of share your worldview in certain sense, who are aligned at the highest levels of abstraction and who are just willing to tell the truth, and you just let them off the leash, you let them go. So okay, so that's how we're going to solve culture. Where else do we go from here?
I mean, I think that's what we're going to be talking about as we kind of weave through this. And I think what I'd like to do with the show and as we move forward is just weaving these threads together: the political side, the cultural side, the artistic side, the meta-political side. So how do ideas work? How do values get formed in society? And how can we actually make a difference? And what I'd like to distinguish ourselves with is this approach, which is not narrow, moralistic, conventional, closed, like rhetorically closed or kind of closed off to ideas, quick to condemn. All of these traits, which I think have served the right very poorly. And I think what the right needs is a greater openness to different kinds of personalities, different kinds of expressions, different kinds of ideas, and different kinds of people, frankly, because the 20-year-old kid, with a bow tie and, a stack of Milton Friedman books under his arm, while he might be a great kid, I think more often than not, he knows so little about life beyond the bounds of whatever kind of prescribed, comfortable kind of ghetto that he lives in. And let's be real, in most institutions, right-wing ideas are only maintained in a kind of ideological or artistic ghetto. And actually move into the culture as a whole with more confidence. And, the last thing that I'd like to touch on, something we also have in common, we have these days a lot of kids, families. We're not just posters. We are posters, of course. We try to post with the best of them, but we have a three-dimensional life that we're living, which demands some seriousness, some responsibility. And one thing that I've tried to teach my kids, and this is counter to a lot of the approach I see with other conservative parents, is a lot of conservative parents are like, how do I keep my kids, sheltered? How do I prevent them from, seeing the bad ideas out there, from having the culture come too close? How do I, police the movies that my teenager is watching? And while like at heart of it, at the margins, those are good instincts, right? You don't want your kids like going crazy. You don't want to put them in terrible environments. You don't want to have them, surrounded by malign influences. But the danger on the other side is that you're not going to have kids that are confident enough to go out into the world as it is. And so I want to build a right that is confident to say, I'm going to walk into any boardroom. I'm going to walk into any meeting. I'm going to walk into any creative pitch. And I have my ideas. I'm confident with them. I'm not going to be kind of dissuaded from engaging with the world as it is and trying to change the world as it is. Not just simply like retreat and try to have a carefully managed bubble of our own.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think, we should do like an episode on being dads and just talking about, our kids and these kinds of strategies. I hear about this all the time when I'm talking to other people our age, especially those on the right, and they're kind of like wondering, like, how do we navigate this world and like what exists out there, what they're going to encounter as just a matter of like being in certain environments, the kind of music and movies. And it is like a wasteland. It's really bad. And, we like, my wife and I, we talk about this stuff all the time and what they can watch and what they can't watch and how we sort of structure the lives so that we have some control over. Of course we do, we're their parents and that's what parents are supposed to do, but also you have to let them be in the world. That's where they're going to exist as adults and you can't keep them from that. I mean, so I'd be really curious to have a longer conversation with you about that, like how you guys navigate some of that. I also, I think like the other sort of disposition here that you're taking towards a lot of this, which I share, is that we can't be dogmatic about what the future is going to look like, whether it's political or cultural or otherwise. We have to come at these questions with a good dose of humility and an understanding that like our assumptions or hunches about what that might look like might turn out to be wrong. And we need to be willing to sort of experiment and discover what the future looks like. These solutions aren't maybe known ahead of time. We have a kind of map, but as we follow that map, we need to be willing to just kind of go with what works and discard what doesn't, and be willing to try things that we might not have thought would be sort of conducive to achieving certain goals in certain contexts and among certain people. So, this is the other thing I want to impart on like a conservative audience is be a little bit more sort of tolerant of experimentation when it comes to all sorts of things, and like not be quite so dogmatic, even when some of this experimentation is going to sort of naturally strike against conservative sensibilities. I think this is why conservatives sometimes have a hard time with these questions. Like being conservative means not being quite as tolerant with certain kinds of ideas and experimentations of certain kinds. And there are limits to this. And of course, we're going to, follow our gut. Okay. You do want to follow your gut. And when something is sort of like repulsive and grotesque, there's a good reason for that. And you don't want to go too close to it. But at the same time, giving yourself a little bit more wiggle room, at least as a matter of sort of like intellectual curiosity.
Yeah, I think that is 100% right. And my thing is like, the world is going in the direction of whatever it is I'm currently working on, which right. is like an eternal temptation. Yeah. Like the solution is my thing that I'm really working on right now, and no other solution works. I mean, we're all tempted to do that, and we all get territorial and defensive of our turf. But yeah, the reality is that we have to be in an experimental time, and we have to be open to being right and open to being wrong. And the hardest one of all is open to acknowledging that others were right. And so I try to do that as much as I can. And you have to figure out where your boundaries are, like personally. Okay, this is how I'm set up my life. This is how I've set up my work. This is how I've set up my kind of social arrangement. This is how I set up my own ideological world. Like, what ideas do I think about? What ideas do I chew on? Who do I talk to? Where do I look for inspiration? And we have to be a bit broader. And I think we have to be more forgiving of people on our side. We have to be willing to give second chances. We have to be willing to, permit, even kind of heresies against the right-wing convention.
Yep, exactly.
And not because we agree with them, but because we want to find the unexpected. And I've, gotten heat sometimes for engaging with people, further to my right, or engaging with people that have, enemies within our, institutions. And I always say, hey, look, like, yes, of course, obviously there are always boundaries. There's always like limits to our own interests, to our own tolerance, to our own world that we've set up for ourselves. But we can't get so narrow and parochial that we miss things. Yep. And so I think that we want to be balancing those things as we do, with our kids, with our families, with our own work, and our own, the people in our orbit. And I think the right needs the spirit of discovery right now. And look, like the right is like we're the descendants and the celebrators of the pioneers, like of great inventors of the American Revolution, which was a revolutionary or a counter-revolutionary movement. And so we can't just be kind of narrow academics that, we read Montesquieu and Locke and call it a day. Like, well, right. As much as I love my Locke, we may need a little bit more. And I hope that's what people get from the show. And I'll give you the last word.
No, I mean, these questions aren't going away anytime soon. And I am looking forward to these conversations. And I think, I'm going to discover what I believe in some sense through this too. Like, I think for our own sake, we want to use this as an opportunity to try to test each other and find these, assumptions that we haven't interrogated very closely that we might be making, and how we can sort of create a more robust understanding of the world for ourselves and for the audience as well. So I'm very much looking forward to this. I think it's going to be really fun. Anything before we go, or is this?
Yeah, well, we need to do like the
week?
Obligatory like and subscribe.
Yeah,
we're launching the show.
All right. Yeah.
We got a great support from blazetv. So you got to like click the bell. What is it? What is the thing they got to do?
Click the button. Say the meme. Okay. Yeah. Do the
Give
thing.
us the clicks.
Yeah.
We're harvesting clicks.
Subscribe.
Right now.
Subscribe.
Support your humble click farmer.
There you go. All right, man. Very good. We'll talk to you next week.
Next time.